Our gospel reading comes from Luke chapter 14, verse 1, and then 7 through 14. Once again, it's the Sabbath. This time, we're not in a synagogue, but rather we're in the house of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath. And they were all watching Jesus closely to see what he was going to do on this Sabbath. Last time I talked about how Sabbath is completion and how the woman was crippled and Jesus healed her and completed her healing. What better thing to do on the Sabbath than to heal, to restore, to reach completion and shalom? Another reason why the Sabbath was instituted, and especially instituted after the Egyptian time in captivity when many were slaves, is that as a slave they had no day off. Every day was devoted to their master. Every day you were subject to the hierarchy of the world. Whether that is a caste system, whether that's an economic system, whether that's an employment system, whether it is the rich and the poor, the day worker or the manager. That's the system of the world. And we organize ourselves based on that system when we organize economies based on that system. But God commanded them to do something radical. Everybody got the day off. Even the animals got the day off. Remember when it says, "You shall not plow the field," it's not just giving the farmer a day off. It's giving the oxen a day off. It's giving the land a day off. All had a day off. It is the day of great equality. There's no rich, no poor, no slave, no free, nor Greek, nor Jew. All have the day off to worship the one God, God of us all. Women, children, men, all could worship God. Sabbath, therefore, was a time to remember that even though we structure ourselves in a society, we are still called to remember that God is Lord and Father of us all. So Jesus looks around this meal and he notices that some are seated closer so they can hear the ideal position as a symbol of status, as a symbol of where they are in the hierarchy and where they are in their learning and their economic class. And some are seated at the far end of the table. You know, the ones where when you break the bread and hand it to the next person and they break off a bread, when it gets down to them, there's just this little crumb that they get to break off because there's not much left. Because those at the first get to take off the biggest chunk. And the ones at the end get what's left. I remember a scene from a movie, Yankee Doodle Dandy. Story about George M. Cohan. And they were struggling actors, and they were living at this boarding house. And they could barely afford anything. And living on credit, basically. And since they were living on credit with the boarding house, when the food came around, they got seated at the end of the table, known as the starvation end. Because when the pot and the plates of food finally got to them, it was broth and it was crumbs and what nobody else wanted to eat. an economic structure, an inequality. Jesus is looking at this on the Sabbath, the day of equality, and says to them, when you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited. But let the host come and say, give this person your place, and in disgrace you'll have to leave. Rather, go to the least desirable. And then the host might say, friend, move up higher. And when you give a luncheon or a dinner, don't invite your friends or your brothers or your sisters or your relatives or rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return, but rather invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. For they are also children of God. No less and no greater. Because of economics, because of life situation, whether it is a debilitating disease, or being unfortunate to be a woman who's been divorced in a society where men could just give a certificate, but the women had to figure out how to feed their family and themselves. And so they resorted to whatever occupation would put food on the table. Invite those people. Invite the one that society casts off, ignores, disenfranchises, because they are as much a child of God as you are. And on the Sabbath, are we not all equal? Are we not all equal? This was one of the things that Paul had to deal with in Corinthians. And he talks about it when he talks about communion. Because communion began to be a potluck. And those who were rich brought a fantastic picnic. And those who were poor had whatever they could scrounge up. So that the Lord's Supper became a time when those who had flaunted it in front of those who didn't. And Paul said, this is not what Jesus wanted. Jesus wanted a banquet table where all were invited and all felt comfortable and all were equal, for all had been saved. What does this say to us today? Do we need a day when we see everyone just for who they are? Not based on their stereotypes, not based on political party or economic status, but rather as simply children of God? How do we come together like that? I think in some ways, it's why people enjoy going to a football game, especially when there's no assigned seating. Everybody just sits in the stands. You never know who's going to be sitting next to you. But everybody's cheering for the same team. Everybody has a sense of camaraderie. Everybody has a sense of equality as everybody yells and screams. Some may have padded seats, some may not. But you're all in it supporting the team. What if we could all be in it praising God? What would that look like? Something to think about as you meditate on Luke chapter 14.